Meccano part number P151 from the 1932 Aeroplane constructor set, better known as the starboard upper wing. Hi, if you want even more Meccano goodness, why don't you check out my Patreon channel? And please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I post updates in the community section, not only for this week's Patreon build, but also for what I'm currently working on. Thank you, and back to the build. Hi, and welcome back. About this point, I normally say how much I love the 1930s aeroplane constructor set builds. I talk about how much they are just a sheer joy to make on some of my favourite Meccano builds. And in this case, that was not so. The aeroplane constructor set was made out of thinner metal, probably to reduce weight. Because these builds are truly huge. But with thinner metal comes an inherent problem. It's also weaker. These sets are around 90 years old now, and they were played with, in some cases quite forcibly, looking at the damage to my sets. And like in the real thing, metal fatigue becomes a problem here, as much as it does in the full-scale prototype. Every kink in the metal makes a weakness that wants to split and become worse. This model had me worried for the whole time the wings were attached to the airframe, and that was the least amount of time possible to film the process. So apart from the anxiety that the build gave me, it was still a fun build. Part of the enjoyment that I'm finding with the builds in general, but also with the aeroplane builds, is the knowledge that I gain. So many things that I never knew. So many daily items that I took for granted without knowing the history behind the inventions, and how much engineering affects our daily life. And for all of us, we accept that today's normal item was yesterday's cutting-edge science, was the science fiction the day before. But we never know the history. We never know the story behind today's normal that got us to here. So today we're exploring the history behind the Cantilever Biplane, a technology that has long since vanished from the science cutting edge where once it perched. But we're also going to look at one of the pioneers of early aviation. Only a dozen years after the Wright brothers took to the air, Hugo Junkers made one of aviation's greatest advancements. In fact, without her Junkers work, the Spitfire would never have flown in the configuration that she did. In 1915, he pioneered the work for the cantilever wing. Up to this point, and in fact for the next 20 years, the biplane ruled. But it didn't have to. Weight is always a nemesis of aircraft. The heavier you are, the slower you fly, the harder your engines have to work. The other issue is drag. The bracing members, the wooden sections that connect the top wing to the bottom wing in the construction of the biplane wing, induce drag on the airframe. To counter this, the theory was that if you constructed the wing out of two spars, they would run the full span of the wing, wingtip to wingtip. The middle section is known as the root, and the tips were known as the, tips. As the wings provide lift in flight, the spars carry the load of the lift. This allows for the disposal of the bracing members. Even though this increases weight, it also reduces drag. And in the early airframes, this reduction in drag allowed you to increase speed, as the engines didn't have to work so hard. This model references the Darmstadt D22. And out of all my research, my first place is to look up the aircraft company Darmstadt, only to find it didn't exist. And as always with research, when you find a rabbit hole, you disappear down it. Darmstadt is a technical university in the city of Darmstadt in Hessen, Germany. In the late 20s and early 30s, they participated in the Challenge International de Tourisme, which were FAI-backed aviation competitions, held from 1928 to 1934 biannually. The competitions were major aviation events pre-World War II. The Darmstadt University entered the second of the two airframes, the D-22-22, also known as the D-22A. The 1932 competition opened on the 12th of August at the Staaken Airfield in Berlin, with Germany hosting after their win in 1930. It consisted of 3 parts: technical trials, a rally around Europe, and a maximum speed test. 6 countries entered with a total of 43 aircraft, with Germany entering 16 crews, France 8, Italy 8, Poland 5, Czechoslovakia 4 and Switzerland 2. The only woman to enter was the English aviator Winifred Spooner, flying for the Italians. She was forced to withdraw from the competition after a forced landing. It was found that her fuel line had been sabotaged. Poland won the competition with 461 points and would go on to host Challenge 34 in 2 years' time. But Germany dominated the leaderboard and came in joint second and third place, with both German pilots winning 458 points, only 3 points behind the Poles. Out of the 43 aircraft that entered, only 24 would finish the challenge. 12 German, 4 Polish, 4 French, 3 Czechoslovakian and 1 Swiss. The D-22A came in 17th place, scoring 375 points, and was the lowest scoring German entry. The D-22 was born out of the Aeroplane competitions. The competition is a challenge for the German technical universities, allowing aeronautical engineers to enter with a design, which they have built. Popular both pre- and post-Second World War, the challenge often sees the entry of new forms of gliders. The Aeroplane was formed out of the Treaty of Versailles that had heavily restricted powered aircraft post-World War I in Germany. Pilots who had survived the war still wished to fly, and they gathered around 3 of the technical universities, Darmstadt being one. In the 1920s, Oscar Ernstles formed this new interest in flying into the esprit de corps known as the Rheingast, based on the slopes of the Wasserkrupp in the Rhine Mountains. These gatherings also became the base for the Rhine contest and allowed Germany to develop aeronautical engineering within the restraints of the treaty. This interest in gliding in Germany, though, was based on the work of Otto Lilienthal. Referred to as the father of aviation, Carl Wilhelm Otto Lilienthal was a pioneering early aviator. He began his glider experiments in 1891, jumping from various sites in Germany. And while Lilienthal was not the only early aviator exploring the limits of heavier-than-air flight, he's the one that pushed the envelope the furthest. And the most important thing he achieved was the ability to repeat the experiment again and again with the same results, proving that his flights were more than just a fluke. His early flights saw him covering around 25 metres or 82 feet. The main problem that he was struggling to overcome was that of control. His design used the same A-frame as Percy Pilcher, an early British aviation engineer. and is very similar to that of modern hang gliders. He was able to gain some control by moving his weight around, but the main flaw in his design was that he was not suspended under the glider but carried in the glider, with his shoulders resting in the A-frame. This limited his ability to move his body weight around and tended to induce a forward pitch that was difficult to recover from. His best flight was 250 metres or 820 feet. It was a record that he and others were not able to beat, even though he dedicated himself to improving his design. On the 9th of August 1896, he jumped from the Rhino Hills, one of his normal sights. It was a sunny day, but not hot, being around 20 degrees centigrade. He was able to achieve the limit of his glide at the normal distance of 250 metres. On his fourth flight, the glider pitched forward and began to descend quickly. Because of the angle of descent, he was unable to recover. Falling from a height of 15 metres, he impacted with the ground and fractured his third cervical vertebrae. He passed away some 36 hours later. The Wright brothers credited their experiments in 1899 on the work carried out by Herr Lithenhals, that without his lead they would not have been able to take to the air. So many of our early aviators died, as the envelope was so small that failure was just too simple. The line between doing and dying was very fine. Of the contenders of Challenge 32, the winner, Franciszek Zucker, would be dead within a year, as would second place Reinhold Ross and Winifred Spooner. They pushed the edge of the envelope and found out they'd run out of luck, and at the same time, the technology didn't allow for backup. Flight is a thing that we take for granted now. It is almost a right to be able to fly, but less than 150 years ago, it was science fiction. That without the early pioneering work carried out by people who all too often died, we wouldn't have taken to the air at all. And if it wasn't for the students of the Ackerflieg, that even today still pushes the limits of glider technology, allowing us to reach a greater height, where would we be? The D-22 airframes were in some ways a dead end of technology, but they did teach us. And even learning that shows us that it's a dead end is still a victory. Knowledge is never wasted, and as we learn, it's easy to forget those things that seem unimportant now. But without the shoulders of the giants that we stand on, we will still be watching the swift as he darts around the evening sky, turning on a wingtip as he hunts his supper. The beauty of the red kite that slowly glides in the thermals of the valley's heat, watching. Or the wing activity of the hawk as it hovers in mid-air, searching for its prey. Flight is a gift, as it belongs to the birds. So maybe we should be more grateful as we jet away on holiday, just in case we have to hand the gift back one day.